absorb light, it excites electron from the valence band to the conduction band. So, and it generates an electron, free electron in the conduction band and a hole in the valence band. So these electron-hole pairs are responsible for this kind of semi-catalytic reactions. So the electrons in the conduction band can migrate to the surface, and it can combine with oxygen, absorb on the surface to form superoxide radicals. At the same time, the holes in the valence band can combine with water to form hydroxy radicals. So these superoxide and hydroxy radicals are responsible for the whole photocatalytic reactions. So whatever it may be, the reactions could be water oxidation or water splitting or solar cells, or it could be dye degradation. Any of these reactions, these free electron-hole pairs are responsible for such reactions. And the performance of the whole catalyst depends mainly on the band gap. So you can see the difference between valence band and conduction band energies, and its ability to produce the electron-hole pairs, also the ability to separate electron-hole pairs. So we need electrons and holes are separate with minimum recombination. So this is a simplified mechanism. So let's go into details. So the overall reaction is not that simple. So if we can see the whole mechanisms. So once the electron and hole pairs are generated, there are different types of side reactions and interfacial reactions. So these are the whole process and time scale. So different processes happens at different time scale. So in the y-axis you can see the photo-induced process inside the semiconductor. So once we hit the semiconductor with the light, it can produce electron-hole pairs, but there are processes inside the semiconductor particle and at the surface. So inside the particle, you can see the generation. So this is the main reaction. So we hit the particle with the light and create electrons and hole pairs. And then the electron-hole pairs migrate to the surface. So at the surface, there are different processes. So this happens at the rate of femtoseconds to picoseconds scale and nanosecond scale. So there are different processes happening at the surface and bulk. So the electrons can migrate to the surface, and it can be trapped, or at the surface and bulk. So it can happen. The trapping can happen at the surface and bulk. So what we need is trapping. So we need to trap electrons and holes separately to make the catalyst more active. And another reaction, the opposite reaction, is recombination. So if the electron recombine with holes, that can react in energy release and low performance of the material of the photocatalyst. So that recombination can happen at a different rates. It can happen at the nanoscale, the nanosecond and picosecond scale in surface and bulk. So these are two competing reactions. So generation and recombination and trapping. So we need an optimum kinetics between these reactions to get a very good photocatalyst. And there are other reactions that are happening on the surface. They are known as interfacial charge transfer. So these are the process happening, the trapped holes or the trapped electrons or the conduction band electrons or trapped electrons with different species. So these are different species that we are going to use in the catalytic reaction. It could be an alcohol or a solvent, or it could be a thiocyanate or platinum catalyst or platinum particles, or it could be oxygen gas absorbed on the surface. So there are many interfacial charge transfer reactions. So the performance of the photocatalyst depends on various factors like generation, electron hole generation rate, and trapping kinetics, and the recombination kinetics, and also the interfacial process. So it's a very complicated reaction. So initially it looked like a very simple electron hole generation mechanism, but it has many other steps involved at different time scale. And let's go into more details of this. So among the different metal oxides, transition metal oxide, titanium dioxide is the most used photocatalyst. And why? So TiO2 it has very high activity, photocatalytic activity, and it is non-toxic. So it can be used in various applications, ranging from medicines to solar cells. So it is non-toxic usually. and it has very high chemical stability. So it can be used in presence of acids, bases, and different chemicals. So it's chemically highly stable, and it's biologically also is inert. So it can be used for different applications like antibacterial applications. And this TiO2, titanium dioxide, that exists in 3 polymorph. So there are anatase, rutile, and brukite. So these are the 3 polymorphs that's interesting for catalysis. Anatase has a band gap. So this anatase has a, you can see a octahedral structure, and rutile and brukite. They all have different crystal structure and different band gaps. So basically different photocatalytic performance. So anatase has a band gap of 3.2 electron volt, and rutile is a narrow band gap, 3 electron volt, and brukite is a wide band gap, 3.4 electron volt semiconductor. So anatase, among these 3 polymorph, anatase is the most active one in the solar spectrum because of the 3.2 electron volt and its structure. So the anatase structure limit electron hole recombination compared to rutile and brukite. And in brukite, it's difficult to create electron hole pairs because of the wide band gap. So we need to supply extra energy to create electrons and holes in case of brukite structure. So these are the overview of TiO2 as a photocatalyst, why it is attractive, very attractive, and why it's the most widely used catalyst. So let's see some of the applications of TiO2 photocatalyst. So you can see because of the white color, is commonly used in paint. So as a painting material, as a tan material, so it reflects energy, it reflects heat. So it's used as a painting material, and it's as a pigment. And it's used for also used for painted wall tiles to create hydrophilic or hydrophobic surfaces, this is very important to create like a hydrophobic glass or hydrophobic. Here you can see the anti-fogging glass. This is a highly hydrophilic glass, so it will not fog. Or by proper engineering, it can be also converted to hydrophobic materials. So these are kind of coating applications, and more advanced applications like solar cells. So the TiO2 can be used as an active material to absorb light in solar cells, in dye-sensitized solar cells, and also for water splitting. So since it's a photocatalyst, so you can use the TiO2 to decompose water into hydrogen and oxygen and separate hydrogen and use it as a fuel. And the photocatalytic properties, so this can be done either catalytically or by applying an external current due to the catalytic properties of TiO2. And one of the most recent application is antibacterial application. So since the TiO2 create electron hole pairs and reactive species on the surface, it can be used to decompose bacteria and other organic matters. So these are widely the different applications of titanium dioxide catalyst. So let's go into more details of antibacterial application. So this also covers antiviral application. So this is an indiscriminate reaction. So if you see, this is a picture of MRSA, which is known as methicillin-resistant bacteria. So these bacteria cannot be killed by using antibiotics. So this can grow still in presence of a very powerful antibiotic, oxacillin. And the solution is photocatalytic killing. So in case of TiO2 or any photocatalyst, the electrons and hole pairs generated can decompose these bacteria or other organic matters, including viruses. Here you can see some of the examples of the infected body parts. So these are known as MRSA. It's well known for hospital-borne infections, which cannot be treated by antibiotics. So photocatalytic killing is one of the method, and my PhD work was focused on one of these applications of TiO2 for antibacterial applications. So if we look into the mechanism of antibacterial killing, so this is what happens when electron hole pairs on TiO2 come in contact with organic matter. So here you can see it's a bacteria with a cell wall. So when this superoxide and hydroxyl radicals formed on TiO2 come in contact with the cell wall, it can decompose the cell walls. And Once the cell walls are broken or the bacteria are broken, the organic matter inside can leak. And then finally, it can collapse the cell structure and followed by decomposition of the whole organic matter. So the organic matter, including the cell wall, can be decomposed into carbon dioxide and oxygen and different gases. So this is one of the very important application that can be used in hospitals and other places for antibacterial and antiviral applications. So TiO2 is a very interesting photocatalyst, widely used, but it has drawbacks. So if you look into the band gap is 3.2 electron volt. That corresponds to 386 nanometer wavelength. So to activate TiO2, we need lights in the wavelength of 386 nanometer, which is UV light. So we cannot use UV light everywhere, and it's only 5% of the solar spectrum. It's a very limited part of the solar spectrum. So we cannot use UV light everywhere because of the wide band gap. So this is one of the main drawback of TiO2 as a photocatalyst. And another one is electron hole recombination is of the order of 35 per seconds. Very fast electron hole recombination. So we need to avoid electron hole recombination. So because of the fast electron hole recombination, efficiency of TiO2 catalyst, even though it is one of the most active and most interesting photocatalyst, efficiency is around 5% or lower. So this is one of the drawbacks of TiO2 photocatalyst. And most of the research in this area on the TiO2 catalysis is focused on how to improve the efficiency, and to make it active in visible light, because UV light applications are limited. So we cannot use UV light in a hospital to disinfect or day-to-day applications. So it should be active in visible light. So these are the two main areas that TiO2 photocatalytic research is focused on. Let's see the different strategies. So next, I will be discussing around various strategies used for activating TiO2 catalysis in visible light. So first one is dye sensitization. This is one of the most widely used and one of the earliest implemented method to activate TiO2. So you can see the conduction band and valence band level of a semiconductor and of a dye. So this dye could be anything like from a rhodamine blue or any kind of dye, including naturally available dyes. So this dye, what happens is when this is for visible light activation, the dye can absorb visible light. Although even though the semiconductor cannot absorb, this dyes can absorb visible light, and it can excite an electron from HOMO to LUMO, and that electron from the dye can be transferred to TiO2. So the TiO2, when coupled with the dye, so the dye is absorbed on TiO2 and then heated with a visible light. This can be active because of the available electrons on the conduction band. And these are widely used in solar cells. So these are used in dye sensitized solar cells and for water splitting also. And this is very inexpensive because most of the dyes are not that expensive, and most dyes can be used. Range of dyes can be used in this case, and it's very cheap. But the drawback is the dyes. Most of the dyes are naturally and synthetically available. Synthetic dyes are not stable, not chemically stable. It can decompose. So when we hit it with the UV light or visible light, these dyes can excite electrons. So after several excitation of the electrons from HOMO to LUMO, these dyes can decompose. They are not that stable. So this is one of the main disadvantage of dye sensitization. But this is one of the inexpensive and widely used method in different systems. So here you can see the dye sensitized solar cell. So it's a typical schematic of a dye sensitized solar cell where you have two electrodes, and on one side we have TiO2 with the dye. So you can see the dye is absorbed, and the performance of this system also depends how dye is anchored on TiO2. Is it through chemical bonds or physical anchoring? It depends on many factors. So here we have FTO and platinum electrode ITO, and the TiO2 material with the dye, and then when it absorbs solar light, it inject electron, and electron flow to the external circuit into the other electrode. So we have a solar cell. So this way we can generate electricity using TiO2 and dye, so through dye sensitization. This is another kind of cell. It's using a different electrodes, different type of electrodes. So this can be also used for water splitting. So here you can see the TiO2 with the dye, the different type of dye, and valence band to conduction band reaction. So the dyes can excite electrodes and electrons, and then transfer. So that create a hole in the dye. So that hole can be used to decompose water to oxygen, and the electron can be used to decompose H plus to convert H plus, reduce H plus to hydrogen. So this this reaction, that dye sensitization, can be used for two main applications. One is in solar cells, the DSSCs, and another is water splitting. So it's used for both electricity generation and hydrogen generation from solar light or visible light. So similar to dyes, so the dyes are not chemically very stable. So one of the recently developed method is quantum dot sensitization. So in this method is simple, like we replace dye with quantum dots. So the quantum dots could be cadmium selenide, cadmium telluride, any kind of quantum dots, just replacing dyes with quantum dots. And the quantum dots can be anchored on TiO2. You can see on TiO2 through special chemical bonds. So this is known as ligands, through special chemical bonds. So this is for electron transfer. So in this case, the reaction is similar to dye sensitization. It's quantum dot sensitization. You can see the quantum dots absorb visible light and excite electrons to the conduction band, and those electrons are transferred to TiO2, similar to dye sensitization. And that electron in a solar cell, in a quantum dot QSSC, quantum dot sensitized solar cell, it can transfer to the external circuit to produce electricity, similar to a DSSC. So this can be used for both electricity generation, and the same method can also use for hydrogen generation from water. So in this case, the advantage over dye sensitization is chemical stability. So the quantum dots are much more stable compared to organic dyes, organic or inorganic dyes. And the visible light, this absorption can be controlled, can be precisely controlled by tuning the quantum dot size. So here you can see quantum dots of different colors. So when we mix this with TiO2, we get TiO2 with a different color that can absorb lights of different wavelengths. So once we tune the size of quantum dots, can also precisely tune the visible light or UV light absorption of TiO2 catalyst. So these are the advantage over the dye sensitization. And so the dyes can be also replaced by noble metals. So this is a noble metal it's known as noble metal sensitization. So in this method, it commonly use gold or silver. So this method you can see the gold or silver, but they can act in different ways. So let's see the performance of silver modification. So as you can see in the TiO2, the holes are formed at the valence band and electrodes at the conduction band. So there is a competing reaction of recombination. So to avoid recombination, we can modify with silver. So in case of silver modified TiO2, the electrons are immediately transferred into silver. And the reduction process happens on silver surface, and the holes are free on TiO2. So this kind of noble metal loading reduces the electron hole recombination. So this is one mechanism. In case of noble metal loaded TiO2, here you can see it's a 3D gold modified TiO2. Another example. You see the absorptions are different. So in case of just TiO2, it absorbs only around 380. But if you modify with gold, that can absorb in the visible region. And that mechanism is totally different. It's known as plasmonic harvesting. So silver can act as a, it can slow down the recombination, but gold can act as a plasmonic antenna. So this process is known as plasmonic harvesting. So the gold nanoparticles absorb light. So depending on the size of this gold nanoparticle, it can absorb light in the visible region. You can see it can absorb in 550 nanometer. That depends on the size and shape of gold particles. And that absorbed energy can be transferred to TiO2, which is known as plasmonic energy transfer, plasmonic transfer from a metal nanoparticle to a semiconductor. So that way, even though the TiO2 cannot absorb visible light, these noble metal particles can act as antenna and transfer the light to transfer the energy to TiO2, and then the TiO2 become catalytically active. So this is another widely used method, but a bit expensive because of the noble metals cost. And another method that we also developed recently is heterojection formation. So instead of noble metals, we can use other semiconductors. So most widely used semiconductors are zinc oxide or tin oxide or iron oxide. So here you can see a few examples. And then couple them with TiO2. So if you look at the band structure, they have different energy levels and band levels. So the zinc oxide, in case of zinc oxide, the conduction band levels is higher than TiO2. But if you check tin oxide, then the conduction band level is lower than that of TiO2. And the valence band are also at different levels. So by properly coupling different semiconductors, it's possible to design high performance catalyst. So in case of zinc oxide, see the electron holes generated, the electrons can be transferred to TiO2. And from TiO2, it can be also transferred to tin oxide. So it's basically slowing down the electron hole recombination kinetics. And also from tin oxide valence band, it can be transferred to TiO2, and then from TiO2 to zinc oxide. So both electrons and hole lifetime are increased in this case by proper designing of heterojunctions. And if you use a narrow bandgap semiconductor like tin oxide, it can also absorb visible light. So it is possible to both design UV and visible light active heterojunctions. And similar in iron oxide. If you check iron oxide, so TiO2 iron oxide hybrid as a heterojunction. So if you see the iron oxide, the band gap is small, so it can absorb visible light. So the electron pairs on iron oxide can be transferred to TiO2. Or in presence of UV light, TiO2 can absorb UV light and then transfer that electron to iron oxide. So such combination, like one narrow bandgap and one wide bandgap semiconductor with different energy levels. So if we form a heterojunction, this can be active both in UV light and visible light, depending on the light that we provide. So it's basically two mechanisms in this case. One is visible light absorption, and another one is reducing the electron hole recombination kinetics to improve the performance. So another widely used method is transition metal doping. So in case of TiO2, doping is the most widely used method the last maybe 20-30 years. So this is the whole process start with transition metal doping. So what happens if you dope TiO2 with another metal ion or a metal? So in case of transition metal oxide or transition metal ions, this can be doped in different ways. So it could be either in the crystal structure, or it could be just a surface modification. So if you look in this case, so mostly the metal ions that we use are transition metal ions like iron, cobalt, manganese, copper. This kind of ions are used to dope TiO2. So by doping TiO2, here you can see if you dope with niobium, so you can replace a titanium ion with a niobium ion or a transition metal ion. And since the conduction bands are formed by cations, this can change the conduction band level. So the niobium, once we drop niobium or any other transition metal ions in the band gap, so it can form additional levels just below the conduction band. So that reduces the whole band gap. It's not direct band gap. In that band gap, it can be reduced below 3.2, and then it can absorb visible light. So the real band gap is not reduced, but there are some additional levels of niobium formed below the band gap, below the conduction band of TiO2, and that creates visible light absorption. Or it could be a different reaction. It could be like a copper, in this case, copper TiO2. So copper cannot replace TiO2. So this also depends on the synthesis method. So in this case, copper is deposited on TiO2. It's not real doping. In this case, so this kind of copper particles can act as electron hole separating agents. So it can reduce the electron hole recombination. Or another method is doing both. Dope and replace TiO2 like titanium ions, and at the same time deposit on the surface. So this kind of methods are also used to improve. So this method is multiple mechanism. So mainly we are creating energy levels below conduction band by replacing titanium ions using a transition metal, and then deposit another transition metal at the surface. So this can so in this method, this can be active in two different ways. One is visible light activation because of the energy levels, and the electron hole separation because of the metal particles at the surface. So, and the O2 reduction can happen at the metal particle, and organic oxidation can happen at the valence band. So basically, the electrons and holes are readily available for reduction and oxidation reaction by properly doping this TiO2 with the transition metals. But mostly this transition metal doping is not very effective because it can generate. So when suppose when we dope copper on titanium, it can also generate unnecessary additional energy levels that can also act as recombination centers. So this is one of the earliest reports on doping, on transition metal doping. So although it can absorb visible light, this kind of catalysts are not very active compared to other materials, compared to other type of band gap tuning. So there are several studies in this case using iron doping or manganese cobalt doping. So all these dopings increase the performance, but not too much. And that's why the newly developed methods are anion doping. So these are known as second generation photocatalyst, or even third generation photocatalyst. So the first generation is just TiO2. Second generation could be cation dope materials, and the anion dope one are latest third generation catalyst. So as you can see, in case of normal TiO2, the band gap is not enough. The visible light is not enough to activate it. So if you dope it with anions, so that can affect the valence band. So in case of cation doping, that affects the conduction band. So in this case, so if you dope with anions, this can affect the valence band. So valence band engineering is the newly developed method compared to conduction band engineering. It's much more active. These catalysts are much more active. So in case of anion doping, it can produce additional energy levels near the valence band, or even it can modify the whole valence band. And let's see the mechanism. So these are most used anion dopants, anionic dopants. It could be boron or carbon, it could be nitrogen doping, or even oxygen doping. That we'll go into details, and fluorine doping. So as if you check the band gap structure of this kind of anion doped materials, you can see they are different. So in case of boron dope, the electronic structure is totally different from fluorine doping, and this highly depends on electronegativity. So if you check, it's increasing electronegativity, and the electronic structure depends on electronegativity. For example, boron can never replace oxygen in TiO2, or carbon, it can never replace oxygen in TiO2. Or nitrogen, in case of nitrogen, it depends. It depends on the synthesis method. So nitrogen can replace oxygen, or maybe it can dope as an interstitial site. And fluorine, it can replace oxygen because it depends on the electronegativity and TiO, titanium oxygen bond strength, all these cases. So only anion that can replace oxygen is fluorine in this case. And if you check the band gap also, see, if you consider the valence band and conduction band in boron doped TiO2, so there is an additional energy level 2.18 volt above the valence band. So in case of carbon, it's only 1.3 volt above, and nitrogen is 0.13 volt. But in this case, it depends. We will go to more details on nitrogen doping. And in case of fluorine doping, see, the energy levels are very close to the conduction band. So even though it is modifying the valence band, there are two different energy levels. So the fluorine energy level below the conduction band, and there is an additional level of Ti3+ because it is replacing oxygen. So fluorine is the only anion that can replace oxygen in TiO2 doping. So this can create two type of energy levels, and even make it more active. And this Ti3+ is not very attractive because this close to the conduction band can act as a recombination syndrome. So it depends. So the anionic doping depends on both anions and type of synthesis. So for example, nitrogen doping, it can replace oxygen, or it can interstitially dope depending on the synthesis method. So we can go more details into nitrogen doping. So this is a kind of energy levels of nitrogen doping. So there are two type of doping. So this is an undoped TiO2, so 3.2 electron volt band gap, and in substitutional doping. So if we consider that nitrogen substitute an oxygen of TiO2, band gap is like this. The whole valence band move up, reducing the band gap. So the band gap can be reduced in different ways. It can be by moving the conduction band or moving the valence band, or creating additional levels. So these are three type of methods. So in case of substitution, nitrogen doping, the whole valence band move up, and the energy band, the band gap reduced to 3.06 electron volt. So in this case, it is visible light active. But another method is interstitial dropping. So in that case, there is an energy level above the valence band. So the valence band stay at the same level of undoped TiO2, but there is an additional level that is 2.46 volt below the conduction band. And this can also create visible light absorption. It can also induce the visible light absorption because of these additional energy levels. So this depends on the synthesis, and this kind of substitutional nitrogen doping require very high temperature to replace oxygen with nitrogen. And the conduction interstitial doping, it require only very low temperature processing. So it depends also on the method, what kind of atmosphere that we use for synthesis. If it is a reducing atmosphere, it can substitute oxygen. If it is an oxidizing atmosphere or low temperature, we normally get this kind of interstitial nitrogen doped material. And the whole photocatalytic mechanism also is also different. So these energy levels are created by the nitrogen levels, and those are paramagnetic materials. Normally by EPR, you can see the EPR spectra, they are paramagnetic material. So the performance of these materials are totally different. So in case of mostly in case of nitrogen doping, the electronic structure is different, and the performance, everything is different. It's depending on the type of doping and electronic structure. So the nitrogen doped material was one of the most investigated in the last 10 years because of the performances. So these third generation catalysts are known for their activity, very high performance in visible light conditions. So let's go to anion doped heterojection. So this is combining multiple mechanisms. So this was one of the few of the materials that we developed recently during my PhD work. So the idea here is we want to dope anions to create additional energy levels. But we also want to develop heterojunctions. So these are combining multiple approaches. So as you can see, the TiO2 has multiple polymorph. It has anatase 3.2 volt, and it has rutile 3 volt, and it has bruchite 3.4 volt. So our idea was to combine these multiple approaches to prepare anatase rutile heterojunction. So these are not two different semiconductors, these are same semiconductors, but different polymorph. Anatase rutile polymorph heterojunction, or it could be anatase bruchite heterojunctions. And then dope both of them. So you can see the mid gap level. So these gap levels are found by nitrogen and sulfur doping. So it can produce a mid gap level. And in case of this heterojunction, anatase rutile heterojunction, you can see the conduction levels are at different levels. So the valence bands are at same level, are at same energy, but conduction bands are at different levels. So that can create electron transfer. So there are two processes. This mid gap levels, the energy levels formed by doping, anion doping can create additional levels for visible light activation. And the different levels of conduction bands that can cause electron separation. So the electrons, as soon as the electron is excited from the mid gap level to the conduction band, those electrons are transferred to the other polymorph, to the rutile phase, and the holes are accumulated on anatase. So we have electrons on rutile and holes on anatase. So the electrons and holes are separated on two different polymorphs. So such kind of heterojunctions are highly active for different applications, including dye degradation and antibacterial. So here you can see this is an antibacterial application. So here we use anatase and bruchite. So bruchite is although bruchite is a 3.4 volt, we use for different purpose here. So the main material is anatase. So we dope it with carbon. So here you can see C2p mid gap level, and electrons, as soon as the electrons are excited on both phase, on both bruchite and anatase, there's an electron transfer from bruchite to anatase. So in this case, bruchite conduction band is higher than anatase conduction band. So there is an electron transfer and visible light absorption from carbon doping. And then we use this material for antibacterial application. So as soon as we have this, electrons and holes pair that can react with oxygen and water molecules to form radicals, and those can decompose. Those radicals can decompose the bacteria. So we did the real-time, the antibacterial testing to see how good is this material under visible light. So the real application is under visible light. So these materials are antibacterially active and also visible light active. And so if you consider TiO2, there is 2 oxygen for each titanium. So this is one of the recently reported method for visible light activation. That's to change the ratio between titanium and oxygen. So we can make either the titanium oxygen deficient or oxygen rich by controlling the synthesis condition. So the black TiO2, you can see in the electronic structure here, black TiO2 and white TiO2. So TiO2 is normally white in color, which is stoichiometry. If it is stoichiometry, it's white in color. So there are 2 oxygen for 1 titanium. So 1 to 2 ratio. And the valence band and conduction band levels are at 3.2, 3.3 electron volt apart. But if we remove an oxygen, you can see black TiO2, it is also known as oxygen deficient TiO2. So if you remove oxygen from titanium dioxide, so the shape of the valence band change. So the valence band, the width of the valence band actually increases, and that reduces the overall band gap. So we can reduce as much as 1.54 electron volt by removing oxygen from the stoichiometry, from the crystal structure. And it's known as oxygen deficient TiO2 or or hydrogenated TiO2. This can be produced under a very reducing atmosphere. So this kind of black TiO2, reducing atmosphere or in presence of hydrogen. Yes. So this is a conventional, most recently reported, and this oxygen-rich TiO2. So we are thinking, okay, how to modify the band gap by adding more oxygen into the structure. So this is one of our work. So this is from the literature. The oxygen deficient one is from the literature. And oxygen-rich TiO2, we are thinking how to make it oxygen-rich. So we created oxygen-rich atmosphere and dope it with oxygen. So the idea is to, dope with this TiO2 at the interstitial sites with oxygen. Yes. So that changed the whole electronic structure. So here you can see with the less oxygen, the valence band, width of the valence band increases. So in our case, when we made it oxygen rich, so the whole position of the valence band shifted higher because the valence bands are made of oxygen, oxygen density of states. So when we make it more oxygen rich, it shifted the valence band and reduced the band gap. So the valence band gap was reduced even to 2.86 electron volt to make it visible light active. So we can make the TiO2 visible light active by changing the stoichiometry also, either oxygen deficiency or oxygen rich, or we can say titanium rich or titanium deficient, since the whole stoichiometry changes. And this is one of the antibacterial testing that we did with oxygen rich TiO2. So here you can see this is the TiO2. White color is the TiO2 stoichiometry. So when we make it oxygen rich, it's slightly yellow color that can also absorb visible light. So the undoped one can absorb around 400. So you can extend the visible light absorption up to 500 nanometer by making it more oxygen rich. And that antibacterial testing, you can see this is MRSA testing. So what we did is we grow the bacterial colonies and then hit it with the light. So light means normal visible light, like an indoor light, like a CFL lamp. And then after 6 hours, 3 hour, different time scale, after 3 hours, there are no bacterial colonies. So that means this kind of non-stoichiometric TiO2 can be visible light active and create radicals that can kill organic matters, including bacteria, viruses, or any kind of pathogens. And finally, some of the newly developed methods for solar cells. These are especially for solar cell application. Modified carbon and perovskite modified. So as you saw in the previous slides, there are solar cells known as dye sensitized solar cells and quantum dot sensitized solar cells. So there's a new class of solar cells known as perovskite solar cells. So this is the basic of those kind of solar cells. So in those material, we have a TiO2 or a semiconductor that is sensitized by either sensitized by carbon-based materials and perovskites. So this slide you can see this is a TiO2 layer combined with graphene. So the advantage here is graphene is a high electronic conductor. It's a good electronic conductor. So as soon as the electrons are formed on TiO2, the electrons are transferred to graphene, which is good for water oxidation. And in this case, you can see carbon nitride. So the carbon nitride can absorb visible light here, and absorb visible light, and then transfer that and that energy to TiO2. So it can generate the C3 and 4 can generate electrons. That electron can convert to transfer to TiO2, and from TiO2 to the external circuit for solar cells. So the carbonaceous material, carbon sensitization. It's not a carbon sensitization. In this case, C3 and 4. Or in case of graphene, it's used for electron hole separation. Those electrons are immediately transported to graphene, and the holes are readily available on TiO2 for any kind of reaction, maybe mostly water spreading. In case of sensitization, it absorbs visible light and then transfer these electron produced on C3 and 4, known as graphene type carbon nitride to TiO2, and then from TiO2 to the external circuit generating electric current. And in case of perovskites, so this is a type of perovskite. It's known as organo lead halides. So these are the groups known as perovskites, organo lead halides. So in this case, this organo lead halides, they have a different type of band gap structure. So they absorb visible light. So it can be also combined with gold electrodes. So it's a metal electrode and an FTO glass and TiO2 combined with perovskites. So perovskite, in this case, perovskites act as sensitizers. So perovskites absorb visible light and then transfer the electron to TiO2, producing a very high performance solar cell. So these kind of solar cells are one of the new generation solar cells compared to dye sensitization or quantum dot sensitization. Perovskite, this perovskite sensitizing, and also this depends the perovskite structure and the interface. So you can see the TiO2 interface and the perovskite interface. So it depends on how the perovskites are attached to TiO2, and that can change the whole band gap structure. So here you can see the density of states with the TiO2 without perovskite and with perovskite. So that can it's possible to tune the visible light absorption and the efficiency of the solar cell, everything by tuning the perovskites and the interface between the perovskites and TiO2. So this is one of the most recent ongoing research in high efficiency solar cells. So in conclusions, so there are several recent developments in the area of TiO2 catalysis. Those are very promising. So studies show that non-metal doped TiO2s and non-metal doped heterojunctions are much more active compared to the old generation doped metal doped TiO2 catalyst. And synthesis method and drop-in concentration, all the parameters affect the performance. So it's also very, very crucial to optimize and engineer those parameters to improve the catalytic performance. And most of these advances in visible light TiO2 catalyst are very encouraging for future applications in energy generation and for environmental protection. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your nice talk. Sir, we have some questions from the participant side. Can I ask them?
Yeah, sure.
So one question is, what MIC value obtained from the antibacterial testing? Sir, is it clear?
Okay. Yeah. So how we did the antibacterial testing is, so it's a different type of testing actually. So we mix the TiO2 in the plate, in the agar plate, and then count the bacterial colonies. So in 6 hours, it completely disappeared the colonies. So these were the type of testing that we use. So at the moment, I don't have more details on this testing. If we could, I can share the publication.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Sir, another question is, does the morphology of TiO2 plays an important role in photocatalysis? If so,
yeah.
Which morphology is preferred?
So yeah, there are various factors affecting the catalysis. So the first one is surface area. So for high surface area, you should normally expect higher performance. And morphology also, normally nanostructures are better, like nanosheets and nanowires are better compared to normal particles.
Okay, sir. Another question is,
yeah.
Please.
And some cases, even if the material, even if the TiO2 has very high surface area, if it is not visibly active or if it has some defects, it may not be active. In some cases, the catalyst may be low surface area. Some of our catalysts are low surface area, but they are very active because of the heterojection formation and proper doping. So we cannot say that very high surface areas are always active and very low surface area. Low surface areas are always inactive. You cannot generalize, but usually high surface area, if we can get a high surface area, is always better.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Another question: how to determine the time scale of electron-hole recombination of a photocatalyst? And
Yeah,
what are the trapped electrons or holes or something like that?
yeah, it's known as a transient spectroscopy. So this is a very advanced method. So we don't usually measure the time scale. So instead, what we do is we usually. So if you go to the first slide, some of the slides you can see this. These are the time scales. So there are different processes: surface process, recombination process, trapping. So there is a method known as transient spectroscopy. It's known as it is used for this kind of time scale calculation. But we usually do fluorescence spectroscopy because we are interested mainly in recombination. So when there is a recombination, there will be fluorescence. So by measuring the fluorescence, we can measure the recombination performance of the material. So if the catalyst is very active, usually it is less fluorescent. So if there are very high electron hole recombination kinetics, very high increased recombination, the fluorescence peak of the sample will be high. So this is how we normally quantify, because we are interested only in this kind of recombination. And there are several processes, interfacial process and all the different processes. But for studying those processes, it's a transient. There is a very advanced method that we can measure the recombination kinetics of the order of picoseconds.
Okay. So another question is how to remove oxygen from TiO2 other than the reducing atmosphere?
Yeah, different methods are doping. So if we can dope TiO2 with fluorine, then we can create. No, you remove you dope three oxygen with two fluorine, or those kind of doping is one method. And other one is reducing atmosphere. So reducing atmosphere is the most widely used.
So
Or
another
cation doping.
So okay, it's use some another anions or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, anion
Like
or cation doping, both can be done depending on the valence, the valence of the ions.
Okay.
But those can create additional levels, additional energy levels. So reducing atmosphere is the best. Hydrogenation is the best method.
So another question is, can we use TiO2 coating in spectacles in order to avoid fogging?
Yeah, it is already used.
It's already there.
So there are various companies using TiO2 coating on specs. So those coatings are made by using ALD, atomic layer deposition, to form a very thin layer to make it more hydrophobic or hydrophilic. Both are possible.
Sorry, you make these nanomaterials in your lab, yeah?
Yeah, I mean currently my group is working on batteries. So the catalysis is my PhD research.
Okay. So can you just make to something like how to prepare this kind of nanomaterials or this? I mean, it's very difficult to get anatized and brookite separated. It's really a mixture always. So how easily you can split them into two phases, like isolating brookite to get a different property?
Yes. So the slide that I show you is brookite. So usually we use soft chemical methods like sol gel and sol gel method and solution precipitation. And we have a method that we developed, peroxo-titanium method. So that is a method that we use for oxygen-rich TiO2. So basically, all these are soft chemical methods, solution phase method, and it is difficult to get. It's difficult to get a brookite.
Okay.
And yeah.
And how you rate the efficiency? Another question is like the efficiency, percentage of efficiency of the solar cell. I mean the perovskite solar cells.
Perovskite solar cells. I mean the efficiency. There is an equation to measure the. I mean we are not working on solar cell. This is a. Example, but there is an equation to measure the solar cell efficiency. I mean the how much voltage it is producing. There is some fill factor. It's a standard procedure.
I think what they were asking is, in comparison with the conventional methods like engines or battery, means fuel cells or something like that, means how you rate the efficiency of a solar cell in comparison with the normal available energy sources.
So if you talk about this kind of solar cell, I think the current efficiency of perovskites are more than 20%.
Okay.
But they are less than a silicon-based solar cell. But silicon-based solar cells, I mean single and polycrystalline, are very expensive. So dye-sensitive solar cells are very less efficient, but and quantum dots are better. But this kind of a perovskite solar cell, I mean, I'm not working on solar cells. These are just methods. They have more than 20% efficiency.
Okay. And this is all from the question answer side, sir. Thank you for answering this question. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you,
Dr. Rajesh. Now to propose the vote of thanks, I invite Dr. Leena Raj of Physics Department.
Thank you so much for this great opportunity of deliver vote of thanks. It was a wonderful session. Dr. Vinod Kumar Evacheri gave us a great insight on the topic semiconductor photocatalysis, recent developments in TiO2 photocatalysis and their various applications. Sir, we are really enlightened with your knowledge and presence. On behalf of the Department of Physics, Maribanes College, and also on behalf of all the participants of this webinar, I express my sincere gratitude for Dr. Vinod Kumar Evacheri. Thank you very much, sir. We are also grateful to all participants who have attended this webinar. Thank you. We will meet tomorrow at the same time. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye.
Once again, thank you. Thank you.
The feedback forms will be given only after the third session or tomorrow after the session.